I'd never come across Leapmotors before, and that's because they were founded in 2015 and came to Europe in late 2024. What really put it on the map for me was the fact that Stellantis, which also owned the likes of Peugeot, Citroën, Fiat, Alfa Romeo, among many others, now owns a 51% stake in the Chinese automaker. Now here we are reviewing one of the cheapest electric vehicles that money can buy. It comes in at just £16,000 and it's called the T03. The vehicle has got a 4-year warranty, while the battery has got an 8-year warranty, or roughly 93,000 miles, whichever comes first. Now in this review, which will be covered in such a format, we'll see if it's actually worth its price tag and of course how it compares to some of its nearest competitors. So let's kick things off and talk about its electric range, because this is actually pretty impressive given the overall price point of the T03. You've got a 37.3 kilowatt hour battery pack, and there is a claimed WLTP mixed driving range of 165 miles. Now from my own mixed driving test, I actually netted 140 to 160 miles. So yes, indeed, it is actually pretty much accurate as to what the manufacturer has been able to claim and what you'll be able to achieve on realistic driving. In other words, going on the motorway, going on the country roads, and also pottering around town within the city. As you'll be able to see from the mileage leaderboard, it does actually fare pretty well. And bearing in mind the overall price point of the T03, it actually makes it even more impressive. Now there is also regenerative braking, and there's a few different modes, and these are actually linked with the drive modes. Now right now I am on the eco mode and driving at 40 miles an hour. If I were to lift off the accelerator pedal, the vehicle will actually quite quickly start decelerating. In fact, it will come to a complete standstill, which is fantastic, as you're able to see right now. Now, if I were to go on the standard mode, if I were to lift off the accelerator pedal yet again at 40 miles an hour, the vehicle will start decelerating, but just not as harshly as the eco mode. Whereas if I were to go on the sport mode, as the name might suggest, if I were to again lift off the accelerator pedal at 40 miles an hour, the vehicle actually feels like it's coasting a little bit more. So it's nice to see that you've got this customization of the regenerative braking feel via the drive modes. Now of course it goes without saying that you can plug it in, and via its CCS port it can take up to 48 kilowatts of input, therefore allowing you to go from 30 to 80% in 36 minutes. Via its Type 2 port, it is capped by its 6.6 kilowatt onboard charger, and therefore connected up to a regular wall box, it will take you roughly 3.5 hours to attain the same level of charge. Now while that's all very well and good, the cabin insulation within the T03 is not the best. See, not only can you hear a bit of road noise coming in from the tyres when you're traversing at faster speeds, and also wind deflecting off the A-pillar, but you can also hear the projected sound that is present on most electric vehicles. And I'm all for that, by the way, because it means that electric vehicles are safer for those people who are blind, and therefore they can hear a vehicle coming across. But due to the poor insulation, it means the T03 is actually quite loud. So if I just go quiet, now that sound is actually pretty loud, and while it is only present at under 20 miles an hour, it's pretty obvious when you're just trying to converse with friends and family within the vehicle. And it really just kind of distracts you from the overall driving experience, because normally electric vehicles are actually really silent and pretty well insulated. But alas, that's not the case within this vehicle. Another thing that really contributes to your overall driving comfort is the suspension configuration. And at the front you've got a MacPherson setup, while at the rear you've got a torsion beam. The combination yields for a relatively pleasurable driving experience, at least within and around town, but I do think it's a little bit more stiff for my liking. See, while going over certain potholes or speed bumps, I was able to feel them a little bit more. And combining this with the low cabin insulation, you can also hear it as well. Nonetheless, it's not too bad in the grander scheme of things, but I just wish the manufacturer had actually made it even softer. As for chucking around winding country routes, it doesn't suffer from too much body lean, and that's no surprise given the overall size of the vehicle, although make no mistake, it's certainly not a sporty electric vehicle. Now this does actually bring me on to performance, and here you have got a front mounted motor that delivers 70 kilowatts of power or 94 horsepower and 158 newton meters of torque. This gives you a front wheel drive configuration, and if you were to apply power on the accelerator pedal at a standstill or indeed while exiting a bend, sometimes you'll get some front wheel spin, although I did find that to be relatively few and far between. Now using RaceLogic's Performance Box Touch, I had it tested from 0 to 20 miles an hour in 2.54 seconds, 0 to 30 miles an hour in 3.84 seconds, 0 to 60 miles an hour in 9.9 seconds, which is not far off the manufacturer's claim, and then 50 to 70 miles an hour in 6.6 seconds. I also recorded a peak acceleration of 0.39 G. As for its top speed, it's electronically limited to 81 miles an hour. So next up we get onto its interior design, and it's no surprise to learn that you've got quite a bit of cheaper use of materials, for example harsh plastic that can be found throughout the cabin and fabric seats. Nonetheless, when it comes to the overall look, I've got no real complaints. You've got a gloss finish towards the dashboard, and it's nice to see that you've got physical buttons and dials on the steering wheel and traditional stalks. The climate controls, however, are all done via the 10.1-inch infotainment system, which is actually positioned a little further down, making it quite handy, for example, when it comes to adjusting the climate, because it feels a little bit more natural. However, when it comes to looking at the navigation, then you'll just have to glance a little further down than you'll be used to in other vehicles, which have their infotainment system planted a little further up the dashboard. Now here, the infotainment system itself is actually very vivid and intuitively laid out. However, there is no support for Android Auto or Apple CarPlay over a wired or wireless connection, which I do think is quite disappointing in this modern age. As a result, you'll actually have to use your smartphone for navigation, or of course you can rely on the built-in sat-nav itself, although I did find it to be a little bit hit and miss. Therefore, you might want to look at getting a car phone holder, which I do think is quite disappointing given the fact that you have got that larger display to play around with. Now elsewhere you have got Amazon Music, which is an online streaming service. However, the other streaming services are not currently present, although they might come in at a later date via future firmware updates, which are supported on the T03. Now elsewhere you've got a fully digitalized 8-inch instrument cluster, which very much serves its purpose by providing you the key driving information that you require, including your traversing speed and the safety systems that are in operation. Here, it's not very customizable and you do not have a head-up display, although that's no surprise given the overall price point of the T03. Now what might shock you, however, is that the stock 4-speaker audio system doesn't actually get as loud as you might expect. As someone who's reviewed over 130 in-car audio systems, I was actually quite surprised. See, while driving at 40 miles an hour with the windows down a little bit, I was running the audio system at 100% volume, including with my smartphone that was connected over Bluetooth. This might not be a massive deal breaker for you, but if you like blazing out some music while you're driving, then you might be left a little bit disappointed by the overall amplifier and the head unit that comes fitted as standard in the T03. In fact, if you want a detailed breakdown of the audio system, make sure you check it up on your pop-up banner or by following the links down the description below or the pinned comments. So next up we get onto storage, and here it's actually relatively spacious within the cabin, which is quite surprising given the overall compact nature of the T03. And I think that's namely due to the fact that the footwell design both at the front and rear have been optimized. Indeed, at the front of the cabin you can place a handbag or a small size rucksack between the two front occupants. Now here you have also got a smartphone holder, which can be pretty handy, and also a cup holder. Then you've also got two USB Type-A ports and a 12-volt socket, which can be used to provide charge. Then the glove box has actually surprisingly been optimized for right-hand drive vehicles. I say that because a lot of the Stellantis vehicles aren't optimized in this department, so it's great to see it present in the Leapmotor. Then towards the center console you've got a small little slit, which can be handy for placing your key fob or indeed some loose change or keys, although bear in mind you've got some harsh plastic over here, and therefore they will be heard rattling about. And then further down you've got another cup holder, which can be handy for your rear occupants. This is actually good because there is no pull-down armrest compartment, given the fact that the T03 is a 4-seater only. Now, the rear of the cabin, you have also got the door bins, which are a little bit limited, although the front two have got a little bit of extra room to play around with. I did actually find them to be a little bit narrow, therefore it was a bit of a squeeze placing my reusable 500ml bottle in this compartment. But nonetheless, with a little bit of force, I did actually manage to get my bottle in. Now next up we have got the boot, and here you've got 210 litres to play around with, or 880 litres if you drop down the seats. Now it's great to see that you have got a hatchback design. However, here the entire second row drops down, and as a result means that it doesn't make it as practical as some alternatives out there that have 60-40 or 50-50 rear split folding seats. It would have been great if the manufacturer had incorporated that. Furthermore, you've got a pretty steep step between the boot floor and the rear portion of the rear seats. And no, before you ask, you have got no sort of underfloor compartment storage either, or an area at the front of the vehicle, therefore meaning that your charging cables will eat up some of the available storage space in the boot. So next up we get onto seating comfort, and here I had no issues whatsoever throughout the cabin. The seats, which are made out of fabric, are actually relatively comfortable and accommodating. Furthermore, you've got 6-way manual controls for the driver and 4-way manual controls for the passenger. You've got no electronic controls nor heated seats or heated steering wheel. It would have been nice to see this included as an additional option, but at least at the time of filming, that's not present. And in terms of headroom and legroom, I had no problems whatsoever at the front of the cabin, and as someone who's just under 6 foot, headroom was relatively decent at the back, although legroom was pretty limited. No surprise given the overall size and class of the vehicle, but just something I thought I should point out. If you've got a child seat, well, you have no problems whatsoever fitting it at the back, but it's of course worth checking out the overall dimensions of the vehicle, or indeed testing it out for yourself in a showroom. Now aside from that, it's actually pretty appreciated that you've got a panoramic roof with an electric sunshade. Indeed, it's actually quite a novelty at this price point, be it for electric or non-electric vehicles, and therefore it does actually make it stand out over some more expensive alternatives out there on the market. Speaking of which, this brings me onto its exterior design, and I'd be curious to know about what you make of it down in the comment section below. In some ways it reminds me of the Honda Jazz, but just looks a little bit less refined. And indeed over here feels like something that's been designed 10 to 20 years ago, and doesn't really compete with some of its modern rivals. But do let me know what you think of it, because this is of course all very subjective, down in the comment section below. As for your side profile, you haven't got body coloured wheel arches, but you have got 15-inch alloys that come fitted as standard. In terms of your colour finishes, it's available in white, grey or the pictured blue. Now moving on, we get onto the overall safety credentials, but unfortunately over here it's not been tested by Euro NCAP, so I can't give you any sort of crash analysis. What I can say, however, is the vehicle does feel a little bit flimsy. Indeed, while on the road, it does suffer from wind, for example, going from one side to the other when you're crossing a bridge, for example, and including if a vehicle just flies past you on the motorway. Equally, if you're just going to be sitting at a standstill and just rocking from left and right, for example, while listening to your favorite tracks, the vehicle itself is also rocking. Elsewhere, when it comes to closing the doors, it feels that you really have to slam them shut, which doesn't really instill the best sort of build quality. You can also hear a little bit of rattle coming from the boot, be it when it comes to closing the doors, or indeed when it comes to traversing at lower speeds over speed bumps or uneven terrain. Now nonetheless, what is great to see is that you've got a plethora of driver assistance systems, which aim to keep you safe on the road. Here you've got adaptive cruise control, which actually does work a treat of keeping you at a safe distance from the leading vehicle and doesn't feel overly jerky either. You then have front collision warning, autonomous emergency brake, lane departure warning, which sometimes can be a little bit sensitive, intelligent speed assist, which is often quite a bit off, in other words picking up the road signs and therefore thinking that it's a higher or lower speed limit depending on where you're actually driving. Blind spot detection and door opening warning, which are actually really good inclusions. Lane keep assist, which does feel a little bit off and therefore means that you might be having to fight the steering wheel while you're on the motorway because it thinks that you're deviating off the center of the line. Then you've got lane change alert and advanced distractor driver warning, which I do think is a good inclusion, although can be sometimes intrusive. Speaking of which, I do think that the driver drowsiness and attention warning is really crazy because it's constantly trying to pick up if you've got any sort of tiredness, and given the fact that you can't actually disable this system, it means you're going to get constant bings and bongs through the infotainment system with you having to tap OK in order to disable the notification. And I just think that is a bit of a step too far. Now you can disable some of these features, but you'll have to do that every single time you step inside the cabin, and this can feel quite tiresome. Unfortunately, the same sort of complaints have been said about some other modern vehicles, but while some of its competitors offer you certain shortcuts on the steering wheel, the Leapmotor doesn't. And as a result, that's just something that you should be mindful about when you come to looking at this vehicle and potentially using it on a day-to-day basis. Now, another thing that really frustrated me was the remote, and while this could be due to the way that the vehicle was configured by another journalist, I would like to point out that when it came to unlocking the vehicle, I often had to press the unlock button multiple times before the actual doors were able to be unlocked. Equally, when it came to locking the vehicle, the lock symbol on the remote didn't actually work, but instead it was the diamond button, which normally is used to locate the vehicle. Very baffling to say the least, and I'm not sure again if it's on a certain use case of this particular vehicle, but just something I thought I should share in this review. Now, on the flip side, what I do like is the fact that you've got rear parking sensors and a rear camera that come included as standard. And given the fact that you have got a pretty tight turning circle, it makes the T03 very easy to maneuver. Furthermore, visibility at the front, side and rear have been optimized, and therefore makes it very easy to check your surroundings. However, it is worth pointing out over here that you've got no rear wiper, and given the overall design of the vehicle, it means that it'll often get pretty muddy or dirty, and as a result means that you might have to manually clean the rear window, be it, of course, unless you go to a car wash or wash the car yourself quite regularly. So with all that in mind, it brings us on to our verdict of the Leapmotor T03. And I do think there are quite a few compromises that you just have to be mindful about before actually looking at this vehicle. For example, you have not got a good use of technology within the cabin, and that's because you've not got Android Auto or Apple CarPlay support, and therefore means that you might have to use a smartphone for navigation, because I wouldn't really rely on the built-in sat-nav. Then you've got those driver assistance systems, which are really annoying and can't be fully disabled, from the low acoustic sound that can be heard within the cabin to the likes of the drowsy warning. Then in terms of the rear occupancy space, it's a little bit limited, although that's not overly surprising given the class of the vehicle. Same could be said about its boot, although it's not overly practical because the entire second row drops down, therefore you've not got a 60-40 rear split folding design. On the flip side, however, you've actually got pretty impressive electric range, given its overall price tag of roughly £16,000, and you've got a good use of standard features, for example, a sunroof with a retractable sunblind, which will be certainly appreciated in colder climates, such as like in the UK, although today is not exactly a great benchmark. Now, I'd be curious to know what you make of the vehicle down in the comment section below, and if you'd pick it over some more expensive alternatives. And if you've enjoyed this detailed independent review, definitely do consider dropping a like, subscribing and hitting that bell notification, all of which would be greatly appreciated. As such, I've been Chris from TotallyEV, and I'll hopefully see you next one. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.